If you come into Hamilton and people are skeptical of the 2D drawings and the hype, it's because we've had that horse and pony show coming to the city for a very long time. Now, granted,
when I look at Hamilton, and I'm not a Hamiltonian, I would call myself a Torontonian today. I look at a city with great bones, a city that had a great industrial past, and I think what I see now is a city that's changing and becoming something different. And I think the challenge here for you and for other people in the political sphere is how to manage what's coming in an ethical, moral way, but also do what's best financially for the city.
And what I see when I look at Hamilton, and I've said this often, that particularly in my neighborhood in Ward 3, which represents the vast majority of the industrial north, I see that my neighborhood is to Hamilton what Hamilton is to the rest of the country. So you're quite right that in times when the industry was booming and we had 40 to 50,000 jobs on the waterfront, this was the industrial heart of this country. We produced the raw materials that built manufacturing, that built our auto sector, that built this country. I'm very pro-development, although not always pro-developer, depending on the situation, to ensure that the folks that have built this city over the course of multiple generations aren't pushed to the fringe. And so it's building and maintaining a place for Hamiltonians while opening our doors to welcome, whether it's new Syrians or people like yourself coming in from Toronto on either sides of the spectrum.
By and large, our average price is in sort of the $350,000 to $400,000 range. Now that may seem like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money, but from the standpoint of real estate today, it's not a lot of money. That's considered middle-class housing.
I probably couldn't afford to buy a house in my own community right now, and I consider myself very privileged in my job and in my work and in my income. What you say is affordable, the banks say you're not eligible. And that's the challenge that we have, is to build sustainable projects that provide a housing mix. So if you have your missing middle, 350 to 400, which is typically what we'd see in the suburbs, right? We're seeing that with a lot of the towns that are being built in the Greenbelt, and we know that that's not sustainable. So if I had a choice between continued expansion into the suburbs or urbanization in the city centers, I would pick urbanization. So I think we would agree on that as well.
Yeah, and I also think that, a lot of things have been achieved in a short period of time here, but this is early days, right? No need to panic, and I'm not suggesting anyone is, but there's a lot that's still going to happen here. I was in the very early stages of Toronto's changes, right? The renaissance that took place in Toronto. Toronto has problems, there's no doubt about it. We have all the problems you have in Hamilton, but worse, right? But what has happened in Toronto is that Toronto is irreversibly now an affluent city and has the tax base to do the right thing. Whether or not our local politicians do it, and they use the money for what they should be using it for.
But it's interesting that you bring that up, because if we truly had a free market, then a development project ought to be able to pay development charges. And looking to government to be able to take care of these social needs and acknowledging that shift has essentially created this affluent city. To acknowledge that, you'd have to acknowledge the people who are not affluent are now displaced. They're now pushed into the new low-income neighborhoods, which are the suburbs. So after the middle-class flight of the 80s and 90s, we're seeing a reverse shift happen. You have Richard Florida coming out with his new urban crisis, recognizing the effects that has happened. And yet here in this city, we're still subsidizing sprawl. We're still subsidizing, density. And I'm looking at it to say, if we have DC charges, if we have parkland dedication fees, there's a reason for that. Because when you bring in inappropriate density along the Gardner and have the tower wall of high-rises, that's going to come with a public demand. And the public demand is they're going to want green space, they're going to want transit, they're going to want social services, And so I'm of the belief that in sustainable urban development, development ought to pay for that stuff.
So in 1990, say 1989 to 1994, we had the worst real estate crisis North America's ever seen, and it happened in Toronto. Toronto was the epicenter of the worst. And so you couldn't give real estate away in that period of time. Nobody wanted it. So the city was scrambling to say, how do we kickstart development? How do we get this whole ball rolling again? So what they did was, for a 5-year period, they reduced the levies to zero downtown. What they did was, they got a development industry to recharge itself and to get real estate prices to start to move again, to allow sustainability. So now, what are they doing? Well, I'll tell you that a typical project, I pay $7 to $8 million every project for development charges. We're paying an average of $25,000 per unit downtown now, from 0 to 25,000. We're also paying, there used to be a parks levy that was 5%. Then the city decided, okay, well, it's now 10%. They doubled it. Now, the city decides on the value, and park dedication in Toronto is based on the value of the land. Okay? So the value of the land is not what you paid for it, it's what the city deems it to be worth. Okay? So I can tell you that on a property where I might have bought a piece of land for $20 million, the city deems it worth $40 million, and the levy is 10%. So there's a $4 million parks levy, and they've been sitting on that money. I've contributed probably $30 million in the last 5 or 6 years to the parks levy. Have they used the parks levy in the city? They haven't. They're sitting there. They haven't created new parks.
We have this interesting cultural phenomenon where folks are coming in from Toronto and they're saying, in my old city, I received X, Y, and Z. I'm here now and I'm demanding as a city councillor that you give me a dog park, that you give me a bike lane, that you give me all these things that urbanists want and expect in Toronto without paying for it. So, there's a bit of a caviar taste with the Burger King budget sometimes with people. And I think that the challenge that we have is managing expectations for folks to know that when you come into the city, and whether you're developing a multi-million-dollar project or whether you're buying a $500,000 home, you're not just buying the bricks and mortar. You're buying into the whole community.
This city is amongst the most expensive cities in Canada to build in. In fact, of all the cities we're building in now, this city and Edmonton are basically tied in terms of the cost to build. The development site we have is an enormously expensive site to build on because there's an underground railway to the south of us. And we can't shore against an underground railway, so we have to shore into the property. Because we're building a tower, and this is our problem, we want to build towers, we have a lot of units. Well, we need a lot of parking, which means we got to go down to Hades. Very expensive. So if I understand that this project doesn't help you and your constituents directly, but what it does is it's a marquee development. It also sets a precedent. If you go look at the images we've put out there, the two-dimensional images do not do justice to the building. You go and look at the model in the sales center, it's going to blow you away.
But the challenge with that, Brad, and I have to push back there. If you've been in Hamilton long enough, we've seen that time and time again. Respectively, you go up James Street. We have right here on this corner. We have the Tivoli project, which was supposed to be this savior project. You look at the James Baptist Church, where they demoed a heritage building. It was supposed to be a savior type project. All the iterations of the Connaught prior to the existing developers had these big grand plans. So if you come into Hamilton and people are skeptical of the 2D drawings and the hype, it's because we've had that horse and pony show coming to the city for a very long time. Now, granted, you have a verifiable track record, but so did the other developers when they came here. So for us, we don't get too excited about that. We're a show me type city. When the shovels are in the ground and things are being built, then I think people might change their perspective.
One of the great things about this city, unlike Markham or Mississauga or Thornhill or Richmond Hill, is it's a city. And you can buy a house, a 100-year-old or 120-year-old house of historic nature that doesn't really exist in large quantities outside of the city, the core of Toronto. And that's a desirable thing for people. I don't see that changing. I don't see the city changing dramatically because people from Toronto, no one's moving here from Toronto to try to destroy the culture and the nature of the city. I think you're fine.
Some of my closest friends, brilliant, creative people, are from Toronto. The communities that are being built in this city, any city that wants and aspires to be a cosmopolitan city, to your earlier point, welcomes new people in. So we are not a localized xenophobic type city. I think Hamilton has had hundreds of years of tradition of welcoming new people. I don't think that's what's at stake. And I would agree with everything that you've just said.
To me now it feels like what's left is an unfinished canvas, and the painting shall continue. And I think that the future is amazing. I think that all of the kind of retrenchments are over. I only see growth in this city, and I don't think it's it's condominium growth. I think it's retail growth. I think you're going to get hedge funds moving here. I think you're going to get tech guys moving here. I think the arts community is going to explode. Yep. I think your entertainment, food, entertainment, beverage is going to explode. And I also think that the hotel industry is going to start again, where you're going to see some terrific hotels, world brands coming here because it's a great mid-sized city.
The whole idea of progress is founded on change. So yes, there's going to be greater density, and I'm a cosmopolitan person, so I want to see high rises, I want to see opportunities for the missing middle. I also want to see government play a bigger role in a national housing strategy that actually builds housing for people that are our most vulnerable, the people who are living in tents right now. So it is still a bit of a tale of two cities, and I'm looking forward to seeing you and your plans unfold. As I understand, nothing officially online yet in terms of the actual process. And so when that happens, I'm sure you're going to have lots of people from the community, the neighborhoods, come to your meetings and kind of, engage in the conversation and look to see what comes next.
Me too. Awesome. Thank you.
Lots of stuff there.
Yeah, you guys are great.
You're not the big bad wolf.
No, I don't know how we're going to